see, although there are 47 processes, usually the output of one process feeds into the input of another. And as you're about to see, not only is that not always the case, but also some of the processes are used several times, depending of course on the project itself. So keeping it simple, each process of the 47 that I've just introduced to you has a set of inputs. These, if you will, are the raw materials going into the process itself. Each process has a set of tools and techniques which are applied within the process. Here I've called these transformation methods and actions. And each process has one or more outputs, and these could be a document, products themselves, a service, or a result. And here I've given a simple example. It's just one of the 47 I've chosen. It's the define scope process, and here you can see it has 4 inputs. In this case, scope management plan, requirements documentation, project charter, and something called organizational process assets. I'll be mentioning some of these in the rest of this module. That feeds into the process itself with the tools that are used within that process. In the case of defined scope, something called alternatives generation, product analysis, expert judgment, and facilitated workshops. In terms of the output or outputs from each process, in this case there's 2. One is the project scope statement, which is a document, and the other is relevant updates to other project documents. So what you'll see throughout my PMP mastery system is each of the 47 processes where I'll take you through all of these and then go on to describe the tools and the outputs. Okay, let's now take this a step further. You see, here's where the iteration comes in. So I've started here with the initiating process and ended up with the closing process. But in between, we can see that the planning process may happen more than once, as well as the executing process may happen more than once, along with the monitoring and controlling process. And this is quite natural and normal within a project. You'll produce a plan, you'll then execute that plan, and you'll monitor and control the way progress is going on that, and as a result of that, things may change and you need to go back and update your plan, which you will then re-execute. So this can be an iterative loop, if you will, until such time as the work has been done, in which case then and only then would you use the closing processes. And in the coming slides, I'm about to show you it gets even more flexible than that. But first, I want to make you clear that the scope of the project is indeed progressively elaborated, much like I've suggested here. For example, the project management plan contains many different documents within it, and these will all be progressively elaborated as a result of executing the processes and monitoring and controlling the process, and by virtue of monitoring and controlling it, updating the plans as you go. This is a term called progressive elaboration, and as you can see, what it means is that some processes are indeed performed iteratively. Now, within my PMP mastery system, you'll also get a very handy ITTO wall chart. This stands for inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. In other words, just like this. And I've created it as a huge roadmap, if you will. It's in the form of a PDF document, and if you wish, you could take this to a local printer and have it printed out as large as you wish and keep it on your wall as a constant reference. And that's all it is. As you can sort of see from this graphic here, it's quite detailed, and you wouldn't necessarily want to memorize this in and of itself, but nevertheless it is a handy reference guide when you need to check out inputs and outputs. Okay, so now I want to introduce you to the third step, if you will, of how all of these work together. And let's, as an example, use what I've called a simple project. And as I've said already, the outputs of one process are often used as inputs into one or more other processes. But before I go any further, let me ask you a question. Does your organisation use phases? Perhaps you call them stages. Because if so, some or all of the 47 processes may take place in each phase, and I'm about to show that in the next slide. But keeping to a simple project example, as in here, and reminding you of what I've already said, in that many processes may be performed in parallel, used iteratively, along with other processes. So how would these look if you applied the PMBOK guide processes to a simple project? Well, you'd start the project off, you would use the initiating process group, that would then lead to the planning process group, producing the project management plan, of course, and then you're into executing and monitoring and controlling. I've shown this in parallel because that's often how it would occur. You give out the work, execute the plan if you will, you monitor its progress, and if you see that you need to take some form of corrective action, that's the controlling. And although not shown on this simple diagram, that may mean, as I've said, that you go back and replan and then re-execute. So this whole thing could be an iterative loop. However, for the purpose of what I'm explaining here, that would then lead to the closing process, and that would be your simple project finished. But going back to the question I asked you of, do you have phases or stages? And perhaps the third question would be, do you have larger complex projects which you'd have to or want to or need to break down into phases or stages? If the answer is yes, then this next slide will help you understand the application of the process groups and hence knowledge areas. So here I want to show you an example of a project with multiple phases. I'll just show 2 here as an example, but it could be 3 phases, 4, so on and so forth. And I've used the word phases, I could use the word stages, and a few textual examples here. You might have such a thing as a design phase within your project, or a test phase, or an installation phase, or a customer acceptance phase, whatever. They're all phases. And what you'd want to do is to take the 5 process groups, here they are again, exactly as in the previous slide, and you might use all of those in one phase. As I said, if you do use phases, some or all of the 47 processes within these 5 process groups may take place in each phase. Here I've called it stage 1, just to show that it could be a phase or a stage. At the end of stage 1, typically, you would have what I've called a gate. It's normally a management review to agree that stage 1 is complete, the products or services have been created, are satisfactory, and now you're seeking authorization from management to proceed to the next stage. And here then would be stage 2. Again, you would apply these process groups using all or some of the 47 processes to stage 2. Now I've suggested this is the finish of the project, in which case the closing process group would close down the entire project. However, I'm sure you could see that you could have stage 3 and stage 4, in which case at the end of stage 2 you'd have a gate where you would need to pass through that gate by getting authorization that the project's still in good shape, the business case is still valid, for example, and you have resources ready, in which case you could then go on and continue on with stage 3. Okay? So these last 2 slides are quite important that you understand this in concert with the fact that plans and other documents may be progressively elaborated, along with the fact that the process groups and their associated processes may be used in an iterative fashion.